They say that the world is at its most beautiful in late April and May, as the various tree types and flowers bloom thereabouts, in turn, so as not to compete for the agents of pollination. On a day of deep, blushing pinks and unbelievable purples, Angelina and Peter drove the length of the mid-Hudson Valley, taking back roads and scenic riverside routes wherever possible. Starting near Germantown, they drove up the winding approach to Olana, the Persian mansion, its outside brick seemingly consisting of gigantic multicolored Legos. In each room, they found a painting by one of the Hudson River painters.
And we kissed as we noted the river below, and all of the Catskills peaks sharply rising beyond in a live painting of the Hudson River scenery. S1. After the tour, we gained respite from the morning wind at the warm brick wall behind the mansion.
A riverside breakfast at Claremont Park was next. Bacon, eggs, and sausages were broiled on the grill, the tasty scents floating on the mid-morning breeze. Soon they were driving down River Road, past Bard College and onward, through Red Hook and toward Rhinecliff, where they stopped for a while on the dock to see the ferry off. From here, they whizzed through Rhinebeck to the Vanderbilt Mansion in Hyde Park, where they rested for a time on the boulders near the shore, as the high tide brought the waves in and splashing against the rocks, cooling the lovers with a refreshing spray. Thus re-energized, they swept onward into Poughkeepsie, where they rested on a stone bench at the Pirate Canoe Club after walking the river bluffs on trails made long ago, the view being much the same now as it was back then. Walking down to float on some wooden piers, they noted the passing of the sloop Clearwater, and also some jet skiers, a strange mixture of old and new. A shady sheaf road took them past the bustle of the malls and into Bowdoin Park, where they cooked a chicken. The park was to become a portion of the proposed Greenway, which from here would connect to the Reese Wildlife Sanctuary. From Wappingers Village, they followed the Creek Side Road, taking the historic tour past the old estates and thence toward Chelsea. Where they stopped at the marina for a riverside kiss, then drove along Lilac Row, seeing views of Newburgh Bay, and swiftly past Castle Point and the Correctional Institute.
They then drove on through Beacon to the hallowed view of Storm King Mountain, where they rested on Sandy Beach, swimming in the warm currents, then ate a leisurely dinner at Breakneck Lodge.
From the restaurant, they beheld the entire vista of the great Storm King and took note of the highway carved into its side, once the only roadway on the river's west side.
Crossing underneath the Hudson River was the Catskills Aqueduct that brought water by gravity alone, from the mountains all the way to New York City, in the river where once only the steamships braved this narrowest part on their journeys into what was then the undiscovered country for most people. Sailboats wandered by, and pleasure crafts motored along, between bites of Peter's triple-decker club and Angelina's Western omelet, for which they had built up a tremendous appetite.
After dinner, we went back to the beach, put out some blankets, and lay there all night, loving, sleeping, writing, talking, and enjoying the sounds of the large waves, since here the river had to quickly rush its bulk of water through the narrow passage.
Towards mid-morning, Angelina and Peter packed their bags and crossed Bear Mountain Bridge, along with the Appalachian Trail. They wandered through the Bear Mountain Zoo, then drove up the mountain for a view back toward the Catskills. West Point was next, the plans of which were once almost handed over to the British by Benedict Arnold. The fortress-like buttresses shouldered their way up from the river shore, at once protecting and symbolizing duty, honor, and service to the country. Heading back north, they passed the old summer mansions of the railroad barons, the tycoons who eventually became environmentalists that went on to preserve much of the Hudson Highlands from encroachment by ore mining companies, and from the power plants that would have tapped the electric potential of water and gravity, and thereby scarred the great Storm King. Zion, and stopped to luxuriate and relax under and over the apple blossoms which had partially fallen, and so had formed a romantic cushion upon which lovers could lay, as if in the palm of heaven's hand, safe in a petal bed under a corolla sky. Angelina, wearing only a smile, was ripening and reddening, like buds that promised fruits from the apple tree in this Eden revisited. She removed Peter's clothes, and they were not afraid that anyone would see, for they were well into the orchard. He drank the dew from her catkin, and she did the same from his cattail, a catalyst that brought forth actions and reactions that built cathectically, like charged emotional ions attracted to the cathodes, reaching cathedral splendor in the airy and open heights and spaces in a living catechism of love's principles, catapulting them into the cataclysm of climax and beyond, into the serenity of catalepsy within which they catnapped, wavering between wake and sleep, in a neverland of connectedness brought to you by the letters. Driving once again, they emerged sometime later in Highland, where they ate at Mariner's Harbor, making friends with all the workers, and then drank a California lemonade and a Blue Lagoon well into the afternoon, the sun shining and sparkling on their skin. Traveling a bit into the future, they walked onto the old railroad bridge, which was to become a treed and grassy pedestrian walkway over the Hudson River, with a small museum house at one end. The afternoon found them driving past the many monasteries, nunneries, and wineries on the road to Kingston, sometimes stopping at the gift and antique shops. Turning west on Route 23, they could see the misty Catskills off in the distance. It began to rain, but it was a gentle, warm spring shower. Soon they were heading uphill in third gear along Route 23A, passing the 4 bridges that spanned the winding Caterskill Creek. Stopping near Bastion Falls, they followed the trail towards the Caterskill Falls that were further in, and here we slow down their journey a bit to join them in a hike. It had stopped sprinkling, but there was mist in the air and the tops of the mountains were shrouded. The creekside path to the waterfall was verdant, wet, mossy, and fertile.
We're in our element again, Angelina reminded.
And indeed it was. The creek was a torrent and the lower rapids were sweet water. Rainwater was coming down the mountainside and crossing the trail in rivulets that sought out the stream. It was slippery in spots, so they held each other as they crossed between huge boulders strewn about like giants' playthings. Water from the trees dripped on them as they walked, and mist rising from the creek drifted in small, wispy clouds that settled in all around them. S2.
It's everywhere, Peter. S1, water.
Caterskill Falls was stunning, with a first fall of about 175 feet to a ledge pool, then another 90-foot fall to the ground. A blanket of sweetness and serenity crept over them as they gazed in wonderment at yet another scene rendered by nature's painters. They made camp behind a fallen tree and ate a snack of cherries and bananas. 20,000 gallons of water were coming over the falls every second, for it had rained very heavily to the north. The roar of the water, though loud, was reassuring and comforting. And, as they nodded in appreciation of it, the wildflowers nodded their wet, drooping heads in return. Soft breezes came and went, and all seemed right with the world on this extended Memorial Day weekend. She didn't answer, for they weren't speaking much in this cathedral-like atmosphere, and so they became relatively silent again, in reverence for the grandeur of it all. Peter looked into Angelina's wild, wet eyes, the many droplets dripping down her face, and she looked back into his eyes and deep into his soul. 1,000 memories flew by in an instant, of all the places they had traveled to in space and time. Impressions poured forth from their souls, passing directly into the other's spirit, bypassing mind, manner, and sense.
Angelina, said Peter at last, I see a friend and partner who understands the love and adventure of this day and the wonderful moisture of this scene. I've never seen anyone enjoy wetness so thoroughly. Look at you. You're soaked from head to toe from the spray of the waterfall.
I never complain about messing up my hair or about anything like that. I revel in my drenching, with a joy that says I'm alive on this earth.
Her shoes were squeaking, and indeed her hair would have to be restyled. Her dress was hanging in a mass of wrinkles, her blouse was saturated to the skin, and her knees were caked with red clay from climbing the steep banks where they had to detour around a washed-out section of the trail.
You're so stimulating, he added, and you're so adventurous.
Look at you, you're quite a mess yourself.
You certainly live close to the edge. There isn't much in life that you miss.
I expect a lot from life.
And we're here to give it to each other, S2, me too.
Live it, Peter, and love it. That's our motto.
In between our eternal sleeps within the womb and the tomb, there is a lovely dream called life, in which roses grow but wither soon a bloom.
Love whispers wake and live, Peter. Where do we get these sayings anyway?
They just come to us.
With this statement, Angelina undid Peter's belt and reached inside. Her blouse seemed to fall off into Peter's hands as he cupped her braless breasts. His lubrication was flowing, and several times he had to still her hand in order to control his excitement. She was a quivering mass of moans as they moved toward the waterfall, where they kissed underneath one of its dousing offshoots. They placed their clothes in a flowery glade and lay on them. Their bodies and spirits merged as Peter plunged into the deep pool of joy, as Angelina swam and heaved underneath. Eons later, he planted his seeds in her flower garden, wherein tulips denoted truth, roses meant beauty, and lilies represented goodness, the three aspects of love. In late afternoon, Peter and Angelina rented a room in the ghostly Catskills mountain house and then walked toward the overlook. The sweet-scented manuscript of their relationship now opened to a most delicious page on which they lived ideally in a perfect state, delicately balanced so as to forever prolong that magic hour between day and night that can often pass too quickly for a couple.
Soft breezes blew the edges of the page of the story that we were living.
It felt like every moment was crafted just for us, didn't it?
They sat on a grassy knoll at the edge of a cliff that overlooked the river valley and the waterfall where they'd been earlier. The view was breathtaking, and of course any fall would have been death-taking. Their eyes swept in the vista, and it was almost too much for the brain to take in, for this was an unusual perspective. They were about 3,000 feet up, on a cliff edge, facing a sheer drop. The landscape of farmlands, towns, and lakes stretched on toward Connecticut. What looked like grass and bushes below were actually treetops.
Here we slowly ate our dinner, and again we would look up and out over the never-ending distance.
And the immensity of it all was always refreshingly overwhelming.
After dinner, they lay face to face on a large rounded rock, a blanket cushioning them.
They drew closer to each other until there wasn't any closer, and soon they became one with each other, as well as with the rock, and with the entire mountain too.
They witnessed a magic moment that was seldom observed, the exact moment when spring met the summer and caressed him with her breezes and touched him with her kisses, awakening him with her last dying breath, as she unfolded her petals and became the rose, the flower that heralds the summer season.
Peter melted against me, dissolved by love, as we became one mind, one soul, one heart, and one body.
Surrounded on all sides by our unified being, we were about, around, next to, and within each other.
It was a unity, to each a perfect second self, each a mirroring of the other soul. I'm writing this in the morning half-light because that's the time of our relationship. Twilight is the only time when the night and day can meet each other and kiss, and this is the page to which our book is open.
This is the time that we can glimpse Camelot and live in our own ideal world. We confide in each other, we live in each other, we live in a perpetual sunrise. S2, we don't fight, we don't even argue.
It is always morning and the world is always bright and fresh.
And I wrote to and read back, when I was in your soul, I felt the shadow of divine beauty itself.
I had joined with you, I saw your inner flame and drew closer to it until it was bright and all-consuming.
All of my senses within and without had combined into a joy which was quite beyond sense.
And that's where we live, in that soulful dimension where we will ever snuggle by our inner fire.
By evening, they had crossed the Rip Van Winkle Bridge into Germantown, the trip completed in summer that had begun in spring. By nightfall, they were home, trying to count the stars.